Good morning, everybody. We are in the middle of the Introduction to English Speech Sounds and a Modern English Structure paper discussing the consonants of English. Let's continue the discussion. The three-term label to describe the consonantal sound is, as discussed, number one, voiced or voiceless, depending upon whether the vocal cords are coming close to each other or no. If they are vibrating, the voice sound is produced. And if they are not vibrating, the voiceless sound is produced. Then we have the place of articulation, depending upon which active articulator is articulating with which passive articulator for the production of the sound. Then the third term is the manner of articulation. What is the way in which the air coming out from the lungs passes through the stricture that is maintained, whether it is completely closed, the oral tract or the nasal tract are completely closed, very close to each other, completely closed and suddenly released with an explosion, slowly released with friction, and so on and so forth, form the manner of articulation. So, voiced or voicelessness, the place of articulation, and the manner of articulation become the three-term label to describe a consonantal sound. In this video, we shall be talking about the nasals in English. We already discussed the plosives and affricates. The difference between plosives and affricates and the present video, which is the discussion on nasals, is that for plosives and affricates, we could observe a complete closure of the oral cavity because the active articulator comes very close and makes a contact with the passive articulator to close the oral tract. And the soft palate is raised in order to close the nasal passage of air as well. Because the air is stopped within the oral cavity for some time, they are all called as stop consonants. The oral cavity is stopped, whether it is for plosive or for affricate. The difference between plosive and affricate is that in a plosive, the active articulator gets separated from the passive articulator and the air that is held up and compressed within the oral cavity comes out with an explosive sound. Hence, they are called as plosives, and English language has got 6 plosives. Whereas in the production of the affricates, a complete closure of the oral cavity is observed, but when the active articulator gets separated from the passive articulator, the air that is held up within the oral cavity slowly comes out with a slight friction. And 2 affricates are there in English, ch and j. For the nasals also, a complete closure of the oral cavity is observed because the active articulator makes a firm contact with the passive articulator to close the oral passage of air. But in nasals, for the first time, we observe that the soft palate is lowered in order to open the nasal passage of air. So nasals also come under stop consonants because the air is held up and is stopped within the oral cavity. But because the soft palate is lowered, the air escapes through the nose, and hence they are called as nasals. So a nasal consonant is produced by a complete closure of the oral cavity, the holding of the closure and the compression of the air coming from the lungs, the lowering of the soft palate so that the air comes out from the nose and not through the mouth. There are 3 nasal sounds in English. One is m, where the 2 lips are involved in the closure of the oral cavity. The other is n, where the tip of the tongue touches the teeth ridge to close the oral cavity. And the third is where the back of the tongue makes a firm contact with the soft palate or the tip of the soft palate called velum in order to close the oral cavity. In the Indian languages, we have got 5 nasal sounds. Did you observe? If you look at the Varnamala of Marathi or Hindi or any Sanskrit derived language, we have the Swar and Vyanjan. Swar is the discussion of the vowel sounds and Vyanjan is the discussion of the consonantal sounds. If you look at the first layer of Swar, you have k, k, g, g. They are all velar sounds. Now, by this time, you are acquainted with the terms. They are all velar sounds because the back of the tongue makes a contact with the soft palate or the velum to produce the sounds. The last sound after k, k, g, g is and that is a nasal sound, where if you pronounce it properly, you would realize that the air is escaping through the nose. Come down to the second layer. Ch, ch, j, j. For the production of ch, ch, j, j, the tongue is involved and the palate as well as the teeth ridge are involved. So they are palato-alveolar sounds, oral. But the last sound that is produced after ch, ch, j, j, is again a nasal sound. Come down to the third layer. T, t, d, d. They are alveolar sounds because the tip of the tongue touches the alveolar ridge. The last sound that you have in this layer is r. That again becomes nasal. Come down to the fourth level. The, th, the, th. They are dental sounds because both the teeth are involved in the production of the sounds. Come down to the last sound that is there. N is a nasal sound. The fifth layer is p, p, b, b. They are bilabial sounds because both the lips are involved in the production of the sound. The last sound that you have again is m, m. That becomes a nasal sound. So the last sounds that we have in each layer of the 5 layers in the Indian languages become the nasal sounds. So we have 5 nasal sounds in the Indian languages, whereas only 3 in the excuse me, only 3 in the English language. And Now, if you look at the very first sound that we have in among English nasals, it is as in M-I-L-L, mill. During the articulation of the sound, both the lips come close to each other. The upper lip and the lower lip make a firm contact so that a complete closure of the oral cavity is observed. Now, till here, it is almost similar to that of a plosive or an affricate. But the difference is the soft palate is lowered to open the nasal passage of air. The air that is coming from the lungs escapes through the nose as a result. The vocal cords vibrate and hence this sound is got the 3-term label m as in mill is voiced, vocal cords vibrate, bilabial, both the lips are involved in closing the oral cavity, and nasal because the air escapes through the nose. Distribution wise, m sound occurs in all the 3 positions as you find in M-A-N, man, A-M-O-U-N-T, amount, amount, and R-A-M, ram. That's right. The examples for the practice would be M-E-A-N, mean, M-I-N-T, mint, M-E-N, men, M-A-N, man, M-A-K-E, make, M-A-T-H-O-D, method, method, R-A-M, ram, C-O-M-E, come. Note that I have aspirated k sound for C-O-M-E, come. M-N-E, M-O-N-I-C. M and N, wherever we get in the spellings, m sound is silent over there. So it is mnemonic, mnemonic, m occurring in the medial position. S-U-M-M-E-R, summer. T-H-U-M-B, thumb. Wherever we have the letters M followed by B in the English words, B sound is always silent. It ends with the nasal sound and we don't pronounce the plosive sound. So it is not thumb, it is thumb. Similarly is lamb, L-A-M-B, lamb. Very good. Go through all these words again and practice for the pronunciation of the sounds. The diagrammatic representation for M sound is as following. As we could see, both the lips are coming very close to each other to close the oral cavity. The soft palate for the first time is lowered so that the air that is coming out from the lungs passes through the nose, as a result of which it is called as the nasal sound. The next nasal that we have is as in N-I-B, nib. During the articulation of this sound, the tip of the tongue makes a firm contact with the alveolar ridge to form a complete closure of the oral cavity. The soft palate is lowered to open the nasal passage of air. The air that is coming out from the lungs escapes through the nose, and the vocal cords vibrate while the sound is produced. So the 3-term label for N as in N-I-B, nib is voiced, alveolar, nasal. And distribution-wise, n sound occurs in all the three positions, as you find in the example N-E-T, net, initial position, A-N-N-O-U-N-C-E, nouns. In both the cases, n occurs at two places, and in both the cases it is medial position. B-A-N, ban, is the final position. A few more examples practicing us for n sound is N-E-A-T, neat, N-I-M-B-L-E, nimble, nimble. Now here after m, b sound is pronounced because nim becomes one syllable, bil becomes another syllable. When the syllable is separated, b sound is pronounced. If they occur in the same syllable, m and b occurring in the same syllable, b is not pronounced, as you could find in lamb. Right? But here it is nimble because b, l become a different syllable. N-E-S-T, nest, N-A-M-E, name, N-O, no, N-U-N, none, N-A-S-T-Y. The British pronunciation is nasty. The American pronunciation is nasty. Right? N-E-I-T-H-E-R. The British pronunciation is neither. Neither, nor. Either, or. But the American pronunciation is neither, nor. Either, or. So both are right pronunciations. You'll have to get yourselves acquainted with the RP, which talks N-E-I-T-H-E-R as neither. C-O-T-T-O-N, cotton. K is aspirated, T and N immediately because N becomes a syllabic consonant. I hope you remember the concept of syllabic consonant. So it's cotton. H-I-D-D-E-N, hidden. L-I-N-E-N, linen. And N-I-N-E, nine. That's right. Practice the words for a better pronunciation. Diagrammatic representation of n sound could be followed in this way. As you could see, the tip of the tongue touches the teeth ridge here to close the oral passage of air. Now, the same thing occurs for t and d as well. The tip of the tongue touches the soft palate, the alveolar ridge or the teeth ridge. But the difference between t, d and n is that in t and d, the soft palate also is raised, and the air escapes through the mouth only after the tongue gets separated from the teeth ridge. Whereas in the production of n, you could find the tip of the tongue touches the teeth ridge to close the oral passage of air. The soft palate is lowered so that the air coming from the lungs can pass through the nose. That's why this is a nasal sound. The third nasal that we have is Take the back of the tongue very close to the soft palate and make it touch the tip of the soft palate, which is called as velum, because it is a vela sound. That's right. As you find in K-I-N-G, wherever you have the words ending with N and G, or in the middle they are occurring with N and G, we don't pronounce G sound, so it is not king, it is king. K is aspirated and end with During the articulation of this sound, the back of the tongue makes a firm contact with the velum, the extreme tip of the soft palate, to form a complete closure in the oral cavity. The soft palate is lowered to open the nasal passage of air. The air that is coming out from the lungs escapes through the nasal passage. The vocal cords vibrate while the sound is pronounced. Notice that all the nasals are voiced. So the three-term label for as in K-I-N-G, king, is labeled as voiced, velar, and nasal. And distribution-wise, sound occurs in the word medial and word final positions only. It never occurs in the word initial position in English words. So S-I-N-G-I-N-G is singing. So it is not singing, it is singing. End with sound. And similarly in the word final position, S-I-N-G, sing. That's right. Some examples as practice for sound is B-R-I-N-G, bring, S-O-N-G, song, L-O-N-G, long, R-U-N-G, rung, S-I-N-G-E-R, singer, L-O-N-G-E-S-T, longest, A-N-G-E-R, anger, A-N-C-H-O-R, anchor, handkerchief, handkerchief, the piece of cloth that you carry along with you on your hand or maybe kept in your pocket is handkerchief. younger, younger. finger, finger. rung. So wherever you have in the spellings ng or nk, you can expect this sound. Practice more for the pronunciation of sound. The diagrammatic representation of can be shown like this, where the back of the tongue touches the extreme tip of the soft palate called velum. Now, this is the same position for the pronunciation of k and g, the two velar plosives. But the only difference is that for the production of velar plosives, the back of the tongue touches the soft palate and the soft palate is raised to close the nasal passage as well. So the air escapes through the mouth once the back of the tongue gets separated from the soft palate, thereby making the sound an oral sound. But here, the back of the tongue touches the tip of the soft palate or the velum, closing the oral cavity, and at the same time, the soft palate is lowered, opening the nasal passage of air. So the air that is coming out from the lungs passes through the nose, hence making it nasal. So in English, we have three nasal sounds. One is as you could find in the first diagram. The other is alveolar nasal, as you find in the second diagram. And the third is as you find in the third diagram as the velar nasal. The first is bilabial nasal, the second is alveolar nasal, and the third is velar nasal. Three nasal sounds are there in English. Plosives, affricates, and nasals all can be grouped under stop consonants because in the oral cavity, somewhere or the other, the air coming out from the lungs is stopped. In the case of plosives, the stopped air is released with sudden explosion. In the case of affricates, the stopped air is released slowly with slight friction. In the case of nasals, the stopped air passes through the nose and not through the mouth. These three categories, plosives, affricates, and nasals, are called as stop consonants in English. Thank you very much for being a part of this video. Stay tuned for the next videos. Bye for now.